I'm here. Hello, Venerable. Good. Wonderful. All right. Okay. Away we go. Our next session.
Thank you. May we offer mandala again?
No, no need. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
That's okay. All right, I'm ready. Okay, let's continue. So, a bit dark, isn't it? I'm a bit dark here because I've got, never mind, you can see me a little bit, I think. Okay, so far we've looked at just the general principle, the Buddha's view that the mind comes from before and continues, that whatever goes on in our mind determines who we become, that negative seeds ripen as suffering and positive seeds ripen as happiness, that it's not punishment, it's not reward, no one's in charge of this, it's a natural law, and Buddhas observe this to be so. So abiding by these natural laws means we're in charge of the process, which means we can guarantee if we want happiness in the future, we have to cause it. Just like if you want a garden in the future, you don't have a panic attack, you just learn botany and you get a garden, baby. It's hardly surprising. Karma's like that. It's a natural law, which is a big surprise to us because we don't think of it this way. We think it is good luck and bad luck, or God has got a plan, or nobody knows. You have all these other ideas. Well, Buddha's got this view, okay? It's this natural law and we abide by it. We have, in the beginning, we can't see it's true. We're not clairvoyant, but we take it as our working hypothesis. That's the plan. And, you know, the first point is, the thing to remember is, before we even talk about compassion here, this is for our benefit. This is the Buddha's view that we often in our culture, we feel guilty about this. Oh, I can't just think of myself. That sounds selfish. Don't be ridiculous. It's self-respect, you know. We are in charge of our own happiness and suffering. So this is what comes from abiding by the laws of karma. It brings a real accountability. It helps us to grow up. It stops us feeling self-pity. It stops us blaming, stops anger, stops fear, stops depression. I'm not joking, because more and more you realize you're in charge of your own life. Part of the terrible suffering we have is we just don't know why things happen, good or bad. So we're really out of control. No wonder we're freaked out, you know. But the Buddha says we are in control. We can be in control. It's a very interesting concept. It's very fascinating. So the more and more we live according to that view, you become more peaceful, you become more relaxed, you become more content, you become more fulfilled. So you get the benefit. Then you can go to the compassion wing and help others. Got to put yourself together first, you know. So all of this is in the framework of the teachings, Buddhist teachings about impermanence. So everything is the nature of impermanence. But here the wake-up call, we're trying to give ourselves as a wake-up call, as a way of transforming our lives, learning to live our lives in the framework of the reality of impermanence, death, transforms everything. And it's quite a profound point, you know. So that's what we've been discussing in general. And then let's get to the specific. We began to get to the specifics of how you help others get ready for death, be ready for death. We discuss a bit of all of that. So let's look now at the death process, what occurs at the time of death, how this process works. And then we can go from there, discuss how we, you know, the process works, how we die, how we get reborn, what are the factors involved in that, and, you know, all these things, right? And then we get some questions from all that. Okay. So this is from the Vajrayana teachings. And it's the same system that the Tibetan medical system uses. It's this view about the universe, that there are minds, trillions and trillions of minds, like these mental continuums, mind streams, rivers of mental moments, and we're inextricably linked to our own set of the four elements. This is very much part of this process. So this process of death, described in 8 stages of this kind of gradual deconstruction, gradual dissolution of these various components. And just the way we are made is, this also occurs every time we go to sleep. So we can learn to even practice imagining going through this process, using sleep as our example. You know, the greatest yogis can actually do that, you know. So from this Vajrayana point of view, they talk about how we have gross consciousness and inextricably linked to our gross physicality. Well, that's the level we function at day to day. That's our concept, that's our sensory consciousness, you know, the capacity of our eye consciousness to work with the eyeball to see shape and color, ear consciousness, tactile consciousness, etc. The grossest level of our conscious being. our sensory consciousness. And clearly that's inextricably linked to the gross physical body. I mean, consciousness is another word for mind. So eye consciousness is not the eyeball. It's the part of your mind that functions through the medium of the eyeball and all the physical bits working nicely together. So there's the mind and then there's the body. There's the gross consciousness and gross body. That's what we know, this package here. So the first 4 stages of these 8 stages is the gradual ceasing of the various components of each of those 8 stages. And by the time you get to the 4th one, where you stop breathing, that, of course, in the modern world is when you think death is. And it's not death yet. And that's a similar equivalent to going to sleep. The sensory consciousness have ceased, haven't they? Someone will open your eyelid and you can't see. Someone will open, touch you and you won't feel it. Well, the way they describe that process is kind of a gradual dissolution of all these energies, and I'll describe, So that, and different things occur, that each about 3 or 4 things occur at each of these 8 stages. So then once the breathing has stopped, then our subtle consciousness is existing, is functioning. Well, not functioning, but it's there. So when you go to sleep, we know that you kind of have this experience called a dream. Well, that's your subtle consciousness. So we know that can be most unusual. We know that people can have clairvoyant experiences. People have out-of-body experiences. People see the future, see the past. This is very common. Now, this is the capacity of our subtle consciousness, and we can train this to an incredible degree of brilliance. That's what we can get when we start getting single-pointed concentration, this amazing meditation technique invented by these Indians before the Buddha. It's still one of the key Buddhist techniques, shamatha, calm abiding, single-pointed concentration. That's from the sutra, not talking tantra, but you do get a subtle level of mind there. And that level of consciousness is more powerful in its capacity for cognition. So when the great yogis have really trained their mind to go to this state of mind, the subtle mind, they don't just have these random weird experiences that we have called dreams. They're in complete control of it. And that level of mind, when it's super trained, can see the past, can see the future, can see the minds of others. This is called clairvoyance, and this is a very natural part of our spiritual progress when we become in control of our mind. So this is subtle consciousness. Now, it is also inextricably linked to its own level of physicality. So the whole physical universe, according to the Vajrayana model of the universe, is made of the 4 elements. Now, that's how we used to talk centuries ago in the allopathic sort of medical system. But they still talk this way in the Tibetan medical system, in the Vajrayana model, in the tantric system. It's similar to the Chinese, similar to the Ayurvedic system. So with the subtle physical part of us is this 72,000 subtle channels, like a subtle nervous system, from the tip of your head to your toenails. The entire body is pervaded by this subtle nervous system, 72,000 subtle channels. And then there's a central channel, which if your spine were to start at the very top here, it will be just in front of your spine, and it goes all the way down in front of your spine, and it ends at the penis for the male and the cervix for the female. Then you've got 2 side channels that start at the nostrils and then go up, and then they go down either side of the central channel, ending in the same place. Then you have all the other of the 72, all kind of messy, all throughout the body, very messy. They're kind of not so clean, clear. They can become clean, clear. And then at different points, here, the throat, the heart, below the navel, and what they call, so on the penis, 3 for the secret, they call these chakras. Just means wheels. Nothing holy about a chakra. There's just all these channels all constricted together at these various points. The crown, the throat, the heart, the navel, and then they call the secret. And that's on the penis, there are 3, and in the female on the inside. This constriction of these various channels, So the point is, when we're wide awake and wound up, there's the gross, finish this one, the subtle body, if you like, the subtle physical energy, this nervous system, then coursing through all these channels are these different wind energies or prana or air. And this is the basis of medical system of health. This is the basis of the Chinese system, understanding all these different, meridians and all the different wind energies, the imbalance. So the Tibetan medical system is based exactly on the Buddhist model of the mind. So all the subtle mind, which is all our different states of mental consciousness, love and attachment and compassion, all the hundreds of different states of mind, all linked to their own set of the winds, all coursing through these channels. So your Tibetan doctor will feel your pulses, and she'll feel an imbalance, let's say, between in the certain wind energies, and she knows it's connected to your attachment. That's why you're having panic attacks. Or she'll know it's connected to your anger. That's why you're having these explosive, out of control things, you know. So there's this intimate relationship between the mind and the physical energy. It's just the way it is. The third component of this physical body is called the red and the white drops, or red and white kundalini. So there's the white one. It's like subtle liquid energy. It predominates at the crown and is the source of the capacity of the human body to have experiences of joy, pleasure, pleasing feelings. Then you've got the red kundalini predominates at the navel chakra, below the navel, and that's the basis of the capacity of the human body to experience heat, which relates to digestion and all of this, you know. So then these red and white kundalini, the main ones are at the heart chakra, and it's called the indestructible drop. And it's a tiny red and white drops, and they're joined together like a tiny bean. And these come from the parents. So when your consciousness, which we'll talk about, goes to the new mummy and daddy at the time of conception, what it joins with, of course, is the egg and the sperm. But in the egg and the sperm are these subtle red and white drops. They call it tigle in Tibetan, or the subtle red kundalini, these subtle kind of red and white drops, that your very subtle consciousness joins with that. And that's the beginning of you from that second. And you begin at your own heart chakra. And then as you progress, as the fetus grows, you grow from the heart chakra. Well, the death process is all the components of the elements of the sensory consciousness, all deconstructing, and the energies gradually going down from the crown towards the heart chakra and up from the feet towards the heart chakra, starting with the first of the 8, and then go, once you've stopped breathing, and I'll go through those first 4, then you go through the next 4, gradually more subtle, more subtle, more subtle, until everything comes to the heart chakra, and all the grosser level of your mind has ceased, and all the grosser physical energies, and all that's left is what they call the extremely subtle consciousness, and the extremely subtle wind energy inextricably linked with that subtle consciousness. So when that leaves when that red and white, and they're in the red and white, and this indestructible drop at the heart chakra. So when that opens up, that's death, and that can be up to 3 days after you've stopped breathing. So once you stop breathing, that's the gross consciousness, or the outer air has ceased. But now the inner airs are still functioning. They get ever more subtle, until eventually the red and white drop open, and the very subtle consciousness carrying all the karmic imprints. The mind is imprinted with all the trillions of karmic things we've done and said and thought, all imprinted in the mind. That then leaves the body programmed from the time you stop breathing to go to the next life. You'll first go to this intermediate state, which is like you go through the reverse 8 stages, and you wake up in this intermediate state, which is exactly the same as a dream state. Exactly the same. It's like when you go to sleep, you dream. It's like a dream state. It's subtle mind. And then when your mummy and daddy hop into bed, the conditions come together, or the egg and sperm join in the petri dish, although they discuss a lot about that, whether or not the consciousness joins in the petri dish, or whether it has to be joining in the womb when it's put into the womb. I've heard different things from different Tibetan lamas. So then you're reborn. Then you jump into your new mummy's thing, and off you go again. So, okay. So at each of these stages, various things cease to function. So one group of things that stop, there are 25 components altogether. So the very first lot are called the 5 wisdoms. So that it's not a fancy thing. It's just a particular way the mind functions. So the very first of these wisdoms that ceases to function at the first of these 8 stages is the capacity to hold a lot of information all at once. Now, you know yourself, when you're very wide awake and wound up, and your eyes are open, you can see lots of different things. You can hold a lot of information. But then when you start to get tired, you can hardly hold anything, isn't it? And then also at the same time, the next thing that ceases is your eye consciousness starts to become kind of blurry, and you can't see very clearly, and you can hardly keep your eyes open, can you? Now, we have this experience every time we go to sleep. Look, when I'm sitting there talking to my friend, and she's chatting away, and I'm feeling really tired. I can hardly see anything. My eyes are struggle to keep them up, isn't it? We know this experience, because these energies are beginning to dissolve, to cease to function. And the wind energies are beginning to move away from all the side thousands of channels and moving towards the central channel. So then at the same time, the I consciousness ceases, the earth element ceases, begins to cease, and your body gets very heavy, doesn't it? They say even when you're starting to die, in this process often starts, they say it tends to be about 2 hours before you stop breathing. One of the signs is, Lama Zopa says, when the eyes are open, and if this process has started, your eyes just stay unblinking. They don't open, they don't blink, and they don't close. That's a sign you'll be dead and you'll stop breathing in a couple of hours. So anyway, the other thing that occurs is the body gets very heavy. Now, I remember when I was in India years ago, in the middle of the summer, boiling hot in Delhi. I've never known anything like it. It's like unceasing heat. And I got malaria and hepatitis together. And no one realized I had malaria, which is like these racking fevers. I was like losing my mind every second day, but I was yellow, losing masses of kilos, like, 20 kilos in like 10 days in this boiling hot heat, 40 degrees every single day with no AC. I thought I was completely out of my brain. And I was dying. When Curtis and Rinpoche, they said I was close to death. I didn't know I was close to death. I just felt terrible. But anyway, the point is, my sister came from Brisbane, especially flew from Brisbane, round trip to Singapore, and I flew from Delhi to Singapore. I was bright yellow, but lucky, this is back in the 80s, but Air India let me fly. They wouldn't have now, I don't think. And I knew if I didn't get out of India, I'd die, So anyway, my sister picked me up in Singapore, and I never forget, as long as I live, this air-conditioned room. It was like being in absolute blissful heaven. But I remember having that experience. They say when you're dying, you feel like you're sinking into the bed. You almost feel like you want to hold something to hold up. You feel like you're sinking. I had that experience. I remember that. I didn't die, obviously. Still I'm here, 40 years later. But it was a very vivid experience. And that's one of the signs, when your body feels, but when you're tired, your body feels like lead, isn't it? Because the earth element is ceasing. Then the I consciousness is ceasing. Then there's all at each of these stages, and they label each of these 8 stages in terms of a subtle vision that occurs. That's an indication of where you're at in this process. And of course, this happens every time we go to sleep, and indeed every time we die, but we're not aware of it. The great yogis who've practiced meditation, and I'll discuss this later, they are aware of these signs. So the first one is called the sign of a mirage. So what's a mirage? It's like the interplay of earth and water, isn't it? Because the next element is the water element. The liquids in your body begin to dry up. Your ear consciousness begins to go. Now, you know that one. You're talking to your friend, and you just missed the last 10 seconds. You didn't hear a word she said, because these energies are absorbing, are dissolving, are ceasing to function. We know this experience. At the same time, the capacity, this particular wisdom, the capacity to distinguish between pleasure, pain, and indifference, that ceases. So you're gradually ceasing, basically. Your earth goes, the earth element goes, the water element, liquids in the body dry up, the second one. Your eye consciousness is going, your ear consciousness, and then the vision at this point is a vision of what they call, it's an interplay of water and fire. Yeah. And it's like smoky, sort of smoky. But what's interesting is, this is now when certain things occur in the 12 links, this process of the 12 links. That's a teaching from the sutra teachings, but it happens simultaneously. So Lama Zopa describes this in the book. So the 12 links are what happen every second of the day. It's a description of how we keep creating complete cycles of rebirths every single day. But there's a particular role that these play at the time of death. Well, about this point, the 8th and the 9th of these 12 links are called craving and grasping. And they're just very extra intense levels of attachment, which are occurring every second of the day. But these kick in really powerfully at the time of death. And this is why there's so much fear. So this attachment kicks in, this intense craving. And the craving is the fear. It leads to incredible fear. And so it causes us to hold on to this person, to hold on, to grasp, not to let go, not to lose. An enormous fear of losing your body, losing yourself. We understand this, So we've got to understand attachment. And this is something we don't much in the West. In modern psychology, is very specific and very profoundly described in Buddhist psychology. And if we need to understand this, so this attachment's multifaceted. Now, one of the functions, we know this from daily life, it's an energy of always being dissatisfied. That's its primordial energy, always dissatisfied. Therefore, that it gives rise to all this hankering, always craving for something, always thinking, what'll I have? Where is it? The cake, the this, the that, looking out there all the time. And that's always dumping itself onto the sense objects. But in general, this attachment is also this constant chatting, constant thinking. And it's either holding on to something that it's got and fear of losing it, or it's always anticipating something in the future, always something to look forward to. Now, we've got that all our lives. We wake up in the morning, you know, so then you look forward to breakfast, and you look forward to cleaning the dishes, and then you look forward to going here. Then you're always making plans, always looking forward, always anticipating. This is the energy of attachment. And when we get very depressed, why? Because there's nothing to look forward to. We're not all perky and happy, you know. That's attachment energy, 99% of the time. So now at the time of death, what have you got to look forward to? If you're a materialist, if your philosophy is philosophical, is materialism, then you've got nothing to look forward to. There is nothing you're going to come. That's why there's so much unbelievable fear. You don't know what's going to happen. So there's a terror. This craving is frantically trying to hold on to this one, not to let go. We understand that attachment. We understand it, you know. And that brings enormous fear. So then the grasping is then even more powerful. And when that kicks in next, that is the trigger. That's the energy. That's the one. That ninth link is one that triggers the second link, which is the karmic seed. It's called karma, the second of the 12 links. And that means that's already the condition. The grasping kicks in, and that's the condition that opens up like your ATM machine and lets the money come out. That triggers the karmic seed that will be the one that'll determine your next life. So if your mind's freaking out, and already that grasping is not happy, but if you've got a friend next to you, you've got a good practice, you've practiced all your life, you're living in impermanence, you've got the grasping, but it's not nearly as intense because you're aware of it, you're thinking of your Lama, you're doing your practice, your friends around you are supporting you, you're feeling steady, you're navigating it. Then when that grasping kicks in, you can handle it, you're okay, because you're hearing positive things. So then that will trigger a virtuous karmic seed. It's that point before you even stop breathing, when you still got your wits about you. But if you're not got a practice and you've never thought of impermanence and you're living in this awful terror, then it's really, really very distressing experience. And so it will naturally then trigger one of your negative seeds, which will then cause, so because your mind's now getting more subtle, your mind becomes almost like more subtle and you can see the future suffering coming. So they say that, Lama Zopa says there are various signs, and people report this, of people who die really scary, freaked out deaths. Like they're like hallucinating, seeing terrible things coming in the future because their mind's getting more subtle and they're seeing their future suffering life, literally like that. Whereas if a virtuous seed is triggered, Rinpoche reports this, and people say this, and people see people who die like this because a virtuous karmic seed was triggered. Literally, they die with joy. Their minds are joyful, happy, because as their mind's getting more subtle, a virtuous karmic seed has been triggered. So now they can see the future happy rebirth because the mind's getting more subtle. It's becoming like clairvoyant, you know. That's the point where the karmic seed is triggered. And grasping this 12th, 8th, 9th link, that's the catalyst. That's the time you need it most to help the person navigate, to help them not have much fear, to help them be stable and secure and hearing positive things and hearing mantras or hearing good words or thinking about your Lama or something like that. That's at that point. So this is in the 8 stages again. Then now, you know, depending on which seed has been triggered, it'll be a very peaceful, joyful experience or be a very scary experience, you know. So of course, if you're in a coma, you won't notice what it's like, but the person's mind is still experiencing these things. That's something that I really want to talk about. I think, you know, in our culture, we use drugs a lot, and naturally people are in great pain. But I think what we don't realize is that you can medicate physical pain, but you cannot medicate mental distress. So we often say, oh, look at her, she's so peaceful. We give people drugs so they can be peaceful. But your mind, you know perfectly well yourself, you can be fast asleep. You're lying next to your husband and you're having this nightmare, but he can't see, you're looking like you're peaceful. So just because your body is quiet, it does not mean your mind is quiet. And that's why the mind is so important, to ensure that you give the right conditions for that person's mind so it can be virtuous. That's why it's really important to try and there's an awareness about this in modern day, to try and be aware, to try and navigate the amount of drugs, policing the drugs you have, because the crucial point is, from the Buddhist perspective, it's really important to try and be as conscious as possible, not to be drugged out of your brain. That does not help you one bit. You will be conscious because your mind will be having these really distressing experiences, So it's really important to help the person be prepared to be conscious, have drugs, sure, but try and get the balance between total unconsciousness and drugging your pain. It's a really important point. So the next stage is now the fourth one, where now the capacity, no, the third one, the wisdom that goes, this ability to distinguish even between your friends and your enemies and your stranger. You've got your beloved grandmother on one side of the bed, and you've got your ugly auntie on the other side, and you can't tell the difference. You're gradually losing the plot. Then that's the third time, the third stage. At that point, the heat in the body begins to go. And this is an interesting point. The way the heat leaves the body, either if it leaves the crown first and gradually goes down to the heart chakra, or it leaves the feet first and gradually comes up to the heart chakra. So if you feel the person's head and it's cold, but their feet are toasty, that's not cool. I don't know what you can do about it, but that's an indication that they're going to go to the lower realms. But if the heat is in the head first and the feet are cold, that's a good sign. So all these things you can't necessarily control, but this is how they describe. So then when the heat goes, gradually all absorbs into the heart chakra. Then the sign at this point, no, the sense to go, the sense consciousness to go is I always forget. The tongue, I think, or the nose consciousness, your nose consciousness. And the sign at this point, this subtle sign, is called like sparks. It's the interplay of fire, and the fourth element is air. So the fourth stage, the wisdom to gradually go, is the ability to even know who you are, to even put two and two together. You cannot do this any longer. You might even be able to think of words, but you can't think of any meaning. You've lost the plot. You don't even know who you are yourself. You're gone, And that point also, the air consciousness, the air element, the breath goes out and doesn't come in again. And the tactile and the tongue consciousness cease. And the tongue apparently gets all very short and turns blue at the root. And as one of my teachers, Geshe Rabchen, one of Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe's teachers, as he said, I always quote this, that tongue that spent its life gossiping is now useless. So now that's when we think that you're dead, but you're not dead yet. And this is the big problem, because it could take easily, this view says it could take up to 3 days before the mind leaves the body. So from different religions, for example, I know with Jewish people, you need to, burn the body as quick as possible after that. But the Buddhist one is, the mind will take up to 3 days to leave, the subtle mind, And the thing is, what's interesting is that all over the world for centuries, there are always reports in all cultures of people, quote unquote, coming back to life. We know this, and that fits with the Buddhist view. The person goes through the death process, they get to the subtle consciousness, but they haven't got the karma to die yet. So they come back to life. And I mean, many reports, Rinpoche, and this book, I think, talks about one man who repeatedly would go through this experience. He repeatedly would look like he's dead, and he wakes up again in the coffin or on the funeral pyre. I mean, even in Victorian times, one hears that they would put a bell in the coffin in case the person came back to life. Now, of course, from the materialist point of view, from the medical profession point of view, this cannot be explained, because as far as they're concerned, when you stop breathing, when the heart stops beating, you are gone, baby. So it's really quite a mystery. And this is what's very fascinating. I always talk about this. While I was editing this book of Rinpoche's, I read a book by an American medical journalist called Nick Teresi, and it's called The Undead. And he's a very funny fellow. It's not about zombies. It's really is actually a critique of the complications and problems and contradictions now, at least in the American medical profession, about exactly when death occurs. They're really having second thoughts now. First of all, one of the logical reasons is because people keep coming back to life and they don't know what to do with that. You cut the liver out and the poor bloke's still alive, you know, because they don't understand. It's like they put it in the too hard basket. You don't know how to explain this. Also, many other things. He had a whole, he's an atheist himself, and he had a whole, and he's a very funny man. He's actually very funny. And he had a whole chapter on out-of-body experiences. Well, out-of-body isn't actually technically correct from this perspective. It's your subtle consciousness, but the experience of your subtle mind while you're fast asleep, or he had a whole chapter about people having these experiences on the operating table while they're under an anesthetic, when you can't be conscious at a gross level, but people report these vivid experiences of seeing exactly what the doctors were doing, the jokes they were cracking, the music they were listening to. So most of the time, he said, most doctors are just cynical about this and don't believe it, don't accept it. But he talked about this one particular case of one woman who had to have such a radical procedure that from their point of view, they had to practically make her dead. She couldn't have been conscious from their point of view, but she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. Now, technically, from the Buddhist perspective, you don't leave your body, but your subtle mind can have that experience. People who talk about astral traveling, you don't actually leave your body. Your body is in your body on the bed, but your subtle consciousness has the power to go to see things in long distances, you know, or to see your own body in the operating table. This is not an uncommon experience. I remember during my very first retreat, a 3-month Vajrasattva retreat, soon after I became a nun in 1978. I remember we were at Tushita in Dharamsala. We did 3-month retreat, very intense, you know, intensive, meditating 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 3 months. I mean, I'm not a meditator, but, you know, if something has to happen if you didn't do that much. So anyway, I remember we would have nap. It was a rainy season. We would have a nap after lunch. Hello? Who is it? Hello? Excuse me, I got a... Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Someone's delivering me some dinner. So sweet. Thank you, Victor. Very kind of him. Okay, so I was in... So I had this dream. We would have our sleep at lunchtime. And then I'd have these vivid dreams. People call them lucid dreaming, like as if you're awake, you know. But at the same time, I was asleep, dreaming, but I was completely conscious with my ears. I couldn't see anything, but my ears were conscious of all the chatting around, all going around, you know. It was a very interesting experience. That's exactly what the subtle mind is capable of. People can even have the experience of seeing things as well as hearing. But that's what I said before. The ear consciousness is more subtle. So even if a person's in a coma or fast asleep like I was, you can hear mantra. That's my friend Judy. She had that experience, which is why it's so important when the person's in a coma or in a dream or asleep, you still be quiet and treat it with respect and play the mantras. It's very powerful. So people have these experiences all over the world. People report these experiences. So of course, the new, you know, the neuroscientific view of mind cannot describe this thing, cannot. And this has been forced as an issue because you don't want to, you know, what happens when you take people's organs, you have to keep them. And I didn't know this before I read this book. And Lama Zopa and all the lamas praise the idea of giving your organs. They all praise it. But then when I talked to Lama Zopa with my questions for this book, I told him that this is what they do, that in fact, they keep you breathing. You're not naturally not breathing. They keep you breathing. They keep your heart beating. Of course, because you want to be all fresh and toasty. So get your organs out so they're all full, warm and toasty, of course. But as Lama Zopa said very clearly in the book, of course, if you can still breathe and your heart can still beat and the body is warm, this is proof that consciousness is still there. Of course, that's not the materialist view. So of course the mind is still there. And this is where the interesting point in the book, there's a different, like I said before, these different scenarios of when you die, what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital, what to do if your loved one gives their organs. And so this is particularly pertinent here. They're keeping you breathing. You're all warm and toasty. Your heart's beating, but your mind is there. You are not dead yet. Your gross consciousness, sure, it's ceased. So they put you on the operating table. And this is what's interesting. He reported this with this one woman who was giving her organs. She was on the operating table, you know, dead as far as they're concerned, but unconscious. The gross senses have ceased, but her subtle mind is still there. And as the woman, the nurse, who monitored the heartbeat said, the moment they got the circular saw to cut her from head to toe, to open her up and take out the organs, that moment her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. Now, as the author joked, I wonder what a dead person has to worry about. But this fits exactly with the Buddha's view. In just the same way that a person unconscious under anesthetic can be, their subtle mind can be aware of what's going on. You can deduce exactly the same for this woman. She was floating at the eye. She had the experience of being above her body, watching what they're doing. And of course she's going to freak out. She's thinking, God, don't they realize I'm not dead yet? Of course she's going to panic. Of course her heart will go to 200 beats a minute. So what do you think that's doing to her mind? That is when it's quite disturbing. So as Rinpoche says, first he praises people who give their organs. It's an incredible way to die, he said. But this kind of experience, that's where the danger is, because that could freak the person out, obviously, and that can then reverse the karma. A virtuous karmic seed would have been triggered when she stopped breathing, but now this can reverse it. And a negative karmic seed can now be triggered and she'll go to the lower realms. So he just said the hospitals have to be careful. That's what he said. But this is a very interesting experience. I found it very fascinating, you know. And also, it's interesting, just by the way, this author, he's a medical journalist in the States, very well known, apparently. He was really cynical about this industry. He was very, you know, not about everybody, but very, very negative, very critical of all the elitist doctors, the arrogance, the way they force people, they manipulate people. Even now in Europe, some of the governments have made the law that you will give your organs unless you say otherwise. It's the other way around now, because he said there's so much manipulating and so much political activity. He was quite cynical about it, which doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do. I mean, I know many people who've benefited from somebody else's organ, and they'll never forget it as long as they live, and they're so grateful. So the benefit is amazing, but it can be dangerous because you're disturbing the mind of the person, and that can reverse their karma and send them to a lower realm rebirth, which is, I think, very fascinating. Now, the other thing was interesting. Rinpoche, when I asked him, I said, once the organ, yes, okay, now what happens once okay, we'll go to that later. We'll come back now. We haven't finished dying yet, okay? So we'll go now to the death process. So once you stop breathing, now the fifth stage kicks in, and I'll just keep this one brief. The white kundalini, the white liquid energy, melts down from the crown, down the central channel, and comes to the heart chakra. And then there's like a vision. More things happen. All those different mental states gradually cease to function, each step gradually ceasing to function. But there's this vivid sign, the image, the vision here is like of a white sky. Then the sixth one, the red kundalini, comes up the central channel and comes to the heart chakra. And then there's a vision like a red sky. And the mind is getting ever more subtle, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. Then the seventh thing occurs, these red and white kundalini come and they enclose the indestructible drop at the heart. And now there's what they call the dark vision. It's like a subtle faint. This happens every time you go to sleep. This happens every single time we go to sleep, but we're not practitioners. We don't notice it. The great yogis can be conscious. So then when the indestructible drop opens, now the very subtle mind is there. That's called the clear light mind. But most of us aren't conscious of it. The great yogis can now meditate there for days, weeks, even months. There are reports, you know, Lama Yeshe meditated for 5 days. Even when he was moved out of the hospital in a car to Vajrayana Institute, he was in meditation at the subtle level for 5 days. The greatest yogis can do that. And there's a whole chapter in the book which is particularly pertinent for anybody who's got a highest yoga tantra initiation, that there's a chapter that's called Death is What the Yogis Have Been Waiting For. It's a really important point. We'll discuss that. So the ordinary people will just stay unconscious. We'll just stay unconscious for 2 days. Could be up to 3 more days. 3 days it could happen after you stop breathing. And then when the time is ready, the indestructible drop opens and your very subtle mind leaves. And from that second, you now do the reverse process and you wake up in this intermediate state, just like waking up in a dream state while you're asleep. But from that second, you're now over. You're finished. From the second the indestructible drop opens and your very subtle consciousness leaves, that's the end of you. You can even, from the intermediate state, you might even be able to see your own body, but there's no memory of it and there's no interest in going back. It's finished or completely gone. Now that intermediate state, it can last for many weeks, they say, you know, but there's many different experiences that occur there. But eventually, your mother, like in our case from our past life, our virtuous karmic seed to get a human body was triggered before we stopped breathing, which have indicated our life would have been fairly peaceful. Even if we'd died as an animal, we could have been an animal, you know. So then we're in the intermediate state and we're kind of in a way, you're waiting for your new mummy and daddy to come along because you need the egg and sperm to get another life. So your mummy and daddy hop into bed and then you do through the 8 stages, you die in those 8 stages and then you run like a magnet. And this is what's most hilarious. Freud would have really liked this. If you're going to be born a boy, in our case, those of us who are girls, they say what drove us from that intermediate state to go to the egg and sperm was intense attachment. Attachment, you see, attachment is described by the Buddha in a much more subtle, more nuanced way than we could ever imagine. It runs the entire universe. This universe, in fact, is the product of attachment. This body we've got, what is this body? It's the 5 senses. What produced it? Countless lifetimes of attachment. It's like karmic evolution. It is in the nature of attachment. This whole universe is driven by attachment. It's like this motor that drives us to do everything. Well, it's the motor that drives us from the intermediate state, driven by intense attachment to have sexual union, in our case, with our father. You get to the egg and sperm in a millisecond, you get pissed off, excuse me, swearing, and then you die, and then that causes you to then get reborn, and off you go. We became Robina or Fred or Prue, whoever we are. If you're going to be born a girl, you get attracted to your mother. No, other way around. You're going to become a girl, you're attracted to your father. You're going to be born a boy, you're attracted to your mummy, you know, sexual attachment. And you see, that's the point about so-called sexual attachment. It's nothing special. It's just very intense attachment, that's all. We make it very special. We almost like a sacrament, you know. It's rubbish. It's just very strong attachment. That's all it is. It's the same as attachment to cake. It's just that it's 100 times stronger. That's all. And triggers much more pleasure. So that's how we get reborn. As Lama Zopa says very kindly at the end of that chapter, then we can see how samsara is driven by delusions, you know. So any questions about that process before we go further?
We have a few questions, but not directly about that process. So
let me hear them. We'll probably get to the answers later, but let me hear them. That's good. Let me hear them.
I'm just scrolling back up. So the first one was from Sarah, and it's about fear. There's 2 parts to her question. So she's saying, I understand this intellectually, but I have such fear sometimes that my body's reactions run away from me and I have anxiety or panic attacks. When I find myself in situations that feel dangerous and therefore bring death to immediate attention, like flying or recently driving on a dangerous road, my body takes over and physically panics, and I find it hard to get control again.
Of course you do, darling. Of course you do. Well, first of all, to be really correct, using the Buddhist model, your body doesn't panic, your mind panics. But because, as I described earlier, we've got this subtle nervous system, and these wind energies are coursing through that subtle nervous system, and all those wind energies are connected to our different states of mind. So what's occurring for you is your attachment kicks in, which is holding on and anxiety, and that triggers those wind energies, which is what causes you to feel it physically. Of course, we have no control, darling. That's our tragedy in samsara. Forget about controlling that. We can't control even day-to-day things. We can't even control our mild experiences. We can't even control the urge to have a cup of tea. We have no control over our minds. That's our problem. And that's really what Buddha's talking about, that we can have control. So part of the process is even theoretically to understand exactly what's happening. It's not your body that takes over. Of course it is. Your body shakes, your body is not having, your mind panics because it's such habit for you, sweetheart. There's no magic fix, but learning to understand the process and then having a daily practice and then learning to, and then even just in daily life, you see, most of the time you would never think that you were afraid of death. Most of us never think about it, but it's totally unconscious. It's like you said, it's only when you meet a certain condition that it comes to the surface, but it's there all the time. So that's why every time you think about, don't wait for the panic to happen. Whenever you see death, think about it and say, that'll be me. Get used to the idea, darling, that you will die. It's only because you're living in denial of it, and then it's forced to the issue when something happens and you can't control it. So start controlling it at a conceptual level, not just occasionally, but every day. Think about impermanence and death. Think about I am impermanent. It's natural. Everybody dies. So you become familiar with it and becomes less fearful. So then don't be surprised that eventually you'll have less panic attacks. But don't wait for them to happen to work on it. That's too late. Work on it every day very consciously. Read about impermanence. Think about it. Meditate on it. Accept the truth. I am impermanent. I will die. And every time you wake up in the morning, one of the first things to think of is, wow, I didn't die yet. Think of these things. Make it very vivid for your life, which means you bring it into the presence for yourself. That'll eventually, when the dramas do happen, you won't have so much fear. But you've got to start somewhere right now, conceptually. That's for every one of us. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Good, darling. Be brave, Sarah. Be brave every day. Be brave. And that's where change, we've got to start at the conceptual level first. Read about impermanence. Think about it. Say to yourself, I am, not to make yourself afraid, but to confront the truth that you are impermanent and you don't know when you're going to die. So every time you wake up, you think, wow, I'm amazing. I'm still alive. I'm going to make the most of today. So you're making it part of your conscious thinking, not just wait for the things to happen. Then it's too late. You get my point?
I do. Is it this? And it's the same, it's equally challenging when I think of other people dying. This
same thing, darling. Same one. It's same one, sweetheart. Exactly the same. So that's why the very first level of practice in the Lam Rim is to think about and contemplate the reality of death and impermanence. I mean, that's it. You got to think about it and read it. And every time you think about it and read it, of course, in daily life, we can't bear to think about it. But this is helping us understand it. Just read a little bit every day. Read these different points. And it's bringing you to the front of your mind, not just putting it in the behind. And slowly, slowly, you become more familiar with it so that it becomes less fearful. This is how it happens, sweetheart. It's very logical. You've got to start at the conceptual level. You with me?
I'm with you, yeah.
Good, darling. Slowly, slowly.
It's sort of interesting to me because the other part of my question was my mother passed away very suddenly 3 years ago. And I was with her when she died. And that in itself was more or less okay. I was very calm, and it was actually quite a privilege, and it felt good, and I could
you felt you could do something.
Yeah,
you felt you could do something,
and it felt more about her than about me. But it has triggered this intense feeling of worrying about other people dying, because obviously it after that moment of death, the grief was overwhelming, but in the moment it was okay. But yeah, I don't know. I'll work on it.
No, but the working on it is learning to think at the conceptual level, to every day read about it and think about it for 5 minutes. Death is definite. The time of death's uncertain. Here's an example. There's an example. I mean, death is in front of you every day, Sarah. Every day you're reading and seeing it. But because it's not close to us, we don't want to know about it. But then say to yourself, well, that'll be me. That will be my dog. That will be my mother. That will be my sister. Say it to yourself. Confront the truth of it. And that is bringing it to the surface. And then it won't be suffocated and put away as a fear. Slowly, slowly, by becoming intellectually familiar with it, but consciously saying the words every day. It sounds almost silly, but it's not. You're reprogramming your mind, Sarah. So when it does occur, you won't be surprised. You see my point?
I do.
But honey, it will happen. Don't say to yourself, oh, they're not going to die. That's total nonsense. Of course they're going to die, but you don't know when. But then what you do is, instead of anticipating it all the time, you realize they're not dead yet. So make the most of it. You're not dead yet. So the learning is, let me make the most of my life. Then you feel happy. In other words, it's like going to that holiday for 9 weeks and every day you're panicking because you know you've got to leave in 9 weeks. I mean, that's hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
Exactly what you're saying. And that's how we all are. But you will leave in 9 weeks. Meanwhile, make the most of it, baby. That's a really good point, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the reason. That's the whole point about it.
Yeah.
Then you make the most of your life. And then you can help others like you did with your mum. Then you won't have fear. When there's knowledge, there's no fear.
Cool.
Slowly, slowly, one day at a time. It's not magic.
Thank you.
Good, sweetheart. What else, people?
So we have a question from Sally. Sally's asking, I saw my dad 1 week after he died, as he didn't leave his wife until she died because she grieved so much.
So I start again. I'm a bit confused. Start again.
I'm a little confused too. I'm sorry. I saw my dad 1 week after he died, as he didn't leave his wife until she died because she grieved so much, and he helped her through her suffering his loss.
I
And
don't
then,
understand the question. Sorry.
well, the question then, and Sally might need to clarify, but the question then is, having lived a meta life, do we choose to go to nirvana, i.e. not to be reborn?
But I need to know the first. I want to know the first part of the question.
Sally, maybe would you like to ask?
Talk to me, darling. Talk to me directly. What do you mean?
I'll unmute Sally.
Where's Sally?
Can you
There you
hear
go.
me?
Good, Swadhan. I can hear you, darling.
Yes.
So tell the first part of the question
Yes.
again.
My mother was so grieving when her husband died that he
Your
stayed
fingers in the
around.
way. I want to see you. Your fingers in the way. I want to see your face. That's better. Move over to the camera. I want to see you, darling. A little bit. There you go. Now I can see you. Good on you. Talk to me. Go on, Sally.
My father, he hung around for his wife because she was so very distressed because they were
What do you
married
mean he hang
60
around?
years.
What do you mean, darling? He hung around. What do you mean?
Well, my mother would talk to him. And
Where was his body? Where was his body?
He was cremated.
Oh, so he was dead already.
Yes, yes.
So then what happened? Then what happened? Your mum did what?
Well, I walked in the house one day and she was talking to him and she didn't know that I'd walked in the house.
Right.
And he made himself present to me.
What do you
And
mean by what do you mean by that, Sally?
I saw him and when I blinked, he disappeared.
Okay, I understand. So what's your question about that?
He was a civil engineer. He worked many, many years to help the human race, building bridges.
Yes.
And he would have gone to nirvana with his wife. And in the
That's
end,
not the way Buddhism would put it, darling. That's not the Buddhist answer at all. No.
well, Venerable Mudu said to me that we can just go free and go to nirvana.
We can if we've got high realization, Sally. That's exactly right. If your father was a great yogi and meditated on emptiness every day, he would have had complete control over his mind and he would have had the opportunity to choose what he would do. We're all capable of that, but it's a fairly high realization and it doesn't follow that your daddy or your mummy might have done that. So then what's the question though? You're hoping that that did happen or you're asking if it happened? What was your question?
These incredible experiences of life after death, having made themselves present to me, and knowing
that could have
you
been your
can,
father, but it might not have been your father. But never mind, Sally. But it is very interesting, isn't it, darling? But the main one is, for ourselves to practice every day and get ready for our own death, so we can be in control of the process. Does that make sense to you?
yes.
Good,
yes.
darling. That's wonderful. So I'm very happy for your mother and father. Your mother died peacefully?
Yes.
That's
yes.
good. That's good. That's good,
Yeah.
darling. Good. Thank you so much, Sally. Now I
Oh,
understand.
thank you.
Sweetheart,
Yeah.
thank you so much. What other questions were there? Anybody?
Yeah, we have a question from Jai. Jai is saying, I work in palliative care and I know that the odds in the 21st century is that my death will be in a hospital or a nursing home. I'm haunted by the concern that the carers will be distressed at seeing a patient in pain. And should I not forego pain relief if I'm in extreme pain? Please tell me your
So
opinion.
you're saying the main problem is you don't want the other people to suffer. Is that what you're saying? I presume that's what I'm hearing you say. Is that right? Well, I think, if that is what you're saying, that's very compassionate of you. But I don't think you can. Sorry, Jai.
It's Jay. Yeah, I pronounce it Jay. And yeah.
So is that how you mean, Jay? What do you mean?
It is exactly what I mean. And particularly because I work in the area, I work with carers, I work with nurses. I know
Yeah.
how devoted they are to people.
Right. Yes.
So that's where my compassion comes in. The
I
thought of
understand.
distressing them unnecessarily just drives me.
But I know, but also it's kind of a bit of a double thing there, because if you're going to be so distressed by the thought that they will be distressed, then
Yeah.
you're going to just make just double trouble, you know. So the key thing you've got to do is learn to practice as you're practicing, working on yourself, so that so that you create the cause to have a peaceful death, and then you'll be a marvelous gift to the people around you. So maybe think more like that. And of course, on the other hand, you know yourself, working with other people, that you have trained yourself not to freak out and not to panic when other people suffer, and you've got the skill to know how to navigate and how to help. So that's, I think, the main one. Really pray and work on your practice daily to die well, so that then you can be a marvelous example to other people, and then they can be of help to you in return. I think that's the best approach. Otherwise, you're going to start anticipating all these problems. You'll just go nuts, darling.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
There's a wonderful job you're doing. It's such a special job to do, isn't it?
I'm so privileged because every day I have an opportunity to confront death and to support people through that path. Now I realize it's a blessing.
It's a great blessing, Jane. Well done. Thank you so much. Thank you, darling. What else there? Anything else there, Amy?
Yeah. Sharon has asked, if we wish to donate our organs, is it possible to prepare our subtle mind for the process of organ donation?
Good point. I know it's a very good point. I think the thing is, the only way you can, you see, okay, it seems to me, first of all, that the majority of people who give their organs won't have the experience that I'm suggesting is the interpretation of the woman whose heart went from 100 to 200 beats. Like, just in the same way that most people don't observe their own operation. Most people are just unconscious, which means it won't disturb you. So for most people, it won't be disturbing, but there is always the odd case when it can be disturbing, when the person will be aware and they'll freak out. So the only time you won't freak out, honey, is if you're a highly realized yogini and have realized emptiness. Then it's totally cool. But until then, you've got to be quite advanced to prepare yourself for that. It's a possibility. It's a possibility, of course. But I mean, I'm just making the added point. It is marvelous to give organs. How could I ever criticize it? But, because there is the view of reincarnation, and there are many more future lives. Dying is not the end of the world. Giving organs is marvelous, but there's many ways that we can help dying. Many ways we can help people with our body. I mean, I can offer my body to the young doctors and they can cut me up and use my body, in like a dead body. It's not just the only thing in the world. I think this is part of the cynicism that the medical journalist was complaining about. It's like it's the holiest thing on the planet, and it's manipulating people, manipulating politics, manipulating governments to make people do it. It's really quite heavy, I'm not criticizing it. It's an incredible thing, and Lama Zopa and all the lamas I know praise it. But I think just to think freshly. I remember one woman who worked in her child let's just telling the negative stories. Her child's organs had been used for several people, and she was so moved by this, and she worked in a place that worked with organs, and she became so cynical and distressed about it. She resigned because she felt the elitism, the arrogance, the manipulating of people, the politics of it. And this is always going to be the downside to every industry. It was just because he wrote about it, this man, and I found it very fascinating. I knew nothing about it all. So of course, but you can't guarantee. Unless you're highly realized, you cannot guarantee you won't freak out if you happen to be conscious that they're cutting your body open. You can really train yourself maybe to know that you are. And just like if you're, it's possible, isn't it? So I think it's something to think about, that's all. Obviously, to think about very carefully. And the other interesting point, what I'm going to talk about now is what to do in these different scenarios. Once the breathing has stopped. So we'll just start with that now, and then we'll get to this next point, and then we'll get some questions later. So the next step is what to do the moment the breath stops. And with all these instructions, there are many instructions in the book. They're all there for people to follow, you know. Then the crucial point, of course, most of all then, is to have it completely quiet. There are certain things you can do, but the crucial one, of course, from the Buddhist perspective, and these are all in the book, there are certain practices that are appropriate to do. There are traditionally in our monasteries is a set of practices called the eight practices at the time of death, including reciting the King of Prayers. There are various things, but there are many things you can opt to do at that point. Now, the ideal scenario is to die at home, or in a hospital or a nursing home where you've got the luxury to have your own room. Then you can control what's going on. The key thing is to control what's going on. An ideal scenario is to have the 3 days, and then you have friends coming day and night, even the whole 24 hours, doing different practices and prayers. That's what they do in the monasteries. That'd be the ideal scenario. Most people probably won't do that, but that is the ideal scenario. And I mean, I remember talking to Yeshikado in Brisbane, who ran the Karuna Hospice for many years. I asked lots of questions of her when I was working on this book. I was up in Queensland, staying in Stradbroke Island, editing the book. And she said that the majority of people don't die at home now. Most people either die in hospitals or die in institutions, like Jay said, you know. So this is the thing, if you can choose to die in the right place, which is the real one, to be able to choose your scenario, then please don't choose to die in a hospital. I'm not being rude, unless you've got your own private room when you can control the environment. This is the key point. Then a friend of mine died in Tasmania. Her husband died. He was in a private nursing home. He'd stopped breathing. She shooed out the staff, locked the door, and kept her there for 3 days, kept herself there doing all the practices. So that's the ideal. If you can have a scenario where it's peaceful and quiet and no one will disturb you, and if you can have that, that is the best, if you can. The next, so if your loved one, the next scenario is if your loved one dies at hospital, then of course, even if you've got, as Rinpoche says, even if you only have 30 minutes, again, you do what practices you can. And the key one is, first of all, you don't disturb the body. So what happens is, of course, if your loved one suddenly dies, we rush in and call the nurses and they start doing their job. Their job is to take care of the body, but our job is to take care of the mind first. So let's say you've got your loved one in hospital and you must tell the nurses on the night staff, if mummy dies, do not touch her and call me immediately. And then you have as long as you possibly can. And I think this is important if you're in a hospital. You discuss it with the staff beforehand. I mean, I find the nurses and doctors in hospitals, and people tell me, are so kind, but you discuss it beforehand. You don't just lose the plot and hand over to them. You keep your wits about you. And you say, if mummy dies, can we have as long as possible? So when Lama Yeshe died in California, in Los Angeles, in a hospital in Los Angeles, they negotiated with the doctors. They were so kind, Lama Zopa said. They allowed them to put it on this gurney, on the stretcher, and wheeled him very gently to an empty room. And they allowed him to be in this room for like 12 hours meditating. Lama Yeshe was meditating with many of the students. That was very kind of them. So if you can have longer, negotiate with the hospital. They might just have a spare bed. You don't know. So you do all that. You work it out in advance, and you make sure they don't touch the body. They call you first. There's certain things, and it's all in the book. It's all described what to do, So then when the time is to give the body, let's say it's in the hospital, when it's the 3 days at home, then there's a thing you can do. There's a chapter in there that describes the various things you can do to ensure that the consciousness has left the body. So then what you do, one of the ways of checking if the mind has left the body, or if the mind is still in the body, but after 3 days, it's almost certain it would have left. It's been found from experience that it's never more than 3 days. Many times it's less. So what you do is, because everything has all gone from the top and up, all the energy, the subtle and physical mental energy has gone from the crown down to the heart chakra and from the feet up to the heart chakra, you put your hand just above the heart chakra, and if the mind is still there, it will be vividly warm. The rest of the body will be cold. That tells you the mind is still there. But if it's cold there, then the mind has gone. But I've heard many people, including nurses, say, you just know the moment happens when the consciousness goes. They talk about it, the soul, of course. And that can be possible. The head can move, when the consciousness does leave the body. That can be possible, even in animals. And this all applies to animals as well, by the way. So in the hospital, if the mind has left, then it's time to finish. They can do what they like with the body now, because the mind is gone. Now it's just, feed it to the dogs. It's just a body. I'm just joking, but you get my point. Now, if you've only got a half an hour in the hospital because they need the bed, then you do whatever prayers you can. Then what you should do is, if the mind is still there, and it's likely it's still there, you put your hand here. If it's still warm, then one of the things you can do, they say, is to tap or to pull the hair very vigorously at the crown chakra, which, as I said, will be right at the back of the head, just in front of where the spine would be if it went all the way up, towards the back of the head. You press, touch very vigorously, or you pull the hair there, and that can encourage the consciousness to come through the crown chakra. And if that happens, you can get born in a pure land, they say, you know. You do your best. Now, the other thing is, and I asked Rinpoche about this, and in this new version of the book, he mentions this. The other thing you could do, if you wanted, if you can't take the body home. I know when Lama Yeshe died in California at the time, it's now changed laws. He died in the hospital, but they allowed us to take the body, and we drove it to our center. I wasn't there, Vajrapani Institute, 8 hours away. That's not allowed anymore. I know a friend of mine died in Santa Cruz in California, the husband of a friend of mine, or the father of a friend of mine. And he didn't want to be resuscitated, but the wife panicked and called the hospital, called the ambulance. So we did all the prayers, and they pulled all the wires. So then they had to put him, we weren't allowed to take the body back home. They had to take him to the mortuary. So even then what we did was, they were very cautious, very gently, you know, put him in the car thing. What's it called? An ambulance, and then took him to the mortuary, and we were allowed to sit with him all day, do prayers, and then they had to put him in the fridge at 4 o'clock. They wouldn't let us stay. So we gave them a CD of the Gyuto monks chanting, and they promised they'd play it in the fridge. So the other dead bodies would have got the blessing of the Gyuto monks as well. Whether they did do it or not, but we just trusted they did. Then we came back the next morning, and we had another day, and we did practices. That's not in the book because that was our experience. There's many things you can do. But in the book, there is what you could possibly do if you wanted to. You're not allowed to stay in that bed for 3 days, but you can take the body of your loved one, and they can ask them to put it in the fridge and leave it in the hospital fridge. And you go home and you do your practices for 3 days. Then you come and get the body after 3 days. It's a possibility. You can do something like that. But otherwise, you do what you can. You do the prayers that you can in that 30 minutes, even 30 minutes. But if you can have longer, fantastic, as long as you can. Then when you have to give the body, then you do this, and then they can take the body and do what they have to do. Now, if your loved one dies in a car accident or suddenly drops dead in the soup, what do you do then? Again, this demands that you have your wits about you. Most people just don't have their wits about them, so they panic. But if you know what you're doing, you can do the resuscitation if you can. You can, whatever. But you would also do the prayers and the practices just in case they are dead. You would say prayers in their ear. You'd try to keep them peaceful. You wouldn't freak out and panic. You do what you can to help their mind. This is why it's training. If you don't have training in something, of course you can't do it when the time comes. This is education we all need, as Lama Zopa says, including for your dog and your guinea pig and the mouse. So what to do if your loved one gives their organs? Well, I've discussed that. This is a very interesting topic. But even again, Rinpoche said, I asked him, is it possible that even after they've cut the body open, taken the organs and sewn the body up again, is it possible the subtle mind can still be there? And he said, yes. It doesn't guarantee, it depends on how much cutting and where. But he said it's not impossible. The mind could be undisturbed. So then you would still do the same things. You would do prayers and practices, and then you would do this business with it, or you keep the body until the mind has gone. That's a really interesting possibility. The other one is if your loved one is a meditator, a serious meditator. Well, they know what they're doing. So there's lots of examples in this book, especially about Lama Yeshe. After he passed away, he was meditating in the clear light mind for 5 days. Amazing, They only discovered this 5 days later when they were ready to, his body was still warm, and not warm, but flexible, because his mind was there the whole time meditating. And only the greatest yogis can do that, those who've practiced all their lives, And what they're meditating on, this is the whole point. The point is this. The whole point of the different meditation techniques in the sutra, where you need single point of concentration, and in tantra, where you want your mind to get to the very subtle level, the only reason to get your mind to that level is because that is the level of mind that is most capable, most powerful, and is utterly unencumbered by all the delusions and all the junk. And that is the level of mind that can get realizations. It's a practical issue. It's very simple. Only the very subtle mind can realize emptiness and can even at the time of death even get enlightened. That's the reason. It's not some holy trip that you leave the body for 3 days for some special reason. It's because the mind can, that the yogis are able to go there consciously to the very subtle level and stay conscious at that level. And because that is the most potent, most capable level of mind, that's why death is what the yogis have been waiting for. It's not a sort of weird idea. We've got to understand this technically, you know, it's a technical point. They can become enlightened then. They can remove all the obscurations from the mind. Any more questions?
Yes, Venerable Robina. Maria was saying that she saw a show recently called Surviving Death, where they told the story about the woman with the circular saw, and also some other stories about people who came back from death. And her question was, all the people in this show who wanted to contact their deceased family members through mediums, does this mean that those people are not reincarnating? Are they stuck in a bardo-like realm?
I know this is a really interesting point, and all I can do is answer it according to what I understand are the different realms of existence and the way they describe. So all I can tell you is that I can't give you definitive answers. So all I know is that it's never more than 7 weeks before, never more than 7 weeks that a person waits for another rebirth. So the point about you don't get stuck in the bardo. So many people, you see in the Western world, I think they talk about people, I mean, like all those spiritualists, they talk about people on the other side. There's only these two options. You're either in a human body or you're a spirit type person, and they float around the world. Well, those spirits are in fact a type of realm of existence, and it is a rebirth itself. So all the ghosts, people who haunt houses, people who are possessed by other beings, they're all in this spirit realm, which is an intensely suffering realm. And it's not happy, but it's a rebirth. They're not stuck anywhere. It's a rebirth. It's a type of rebirth due to attachment. So even the people who are channeling, you know, people who channel people, who talk and everything, they're often in the spirit realm. They're not necessarily good people at all. So spirits can be very powerful, can be very manipulative. So a person who says that they're hearing Mozart, you know, that might be just a spirit acting like Mozart. I mean, Mozart probably had 27 lives since he died. So that wouldn't be Mozart. You'd see Mozart, you'd see your mother in her form, for example, but it can't be your mother. As Lama Zopa says, from the time you die, from the time you stop breathing and leave the body, your life is over. But the vision you have of that being is in the form of your mother. Or if you see that ghost in that house looking like this 17th century lady, which is an exact description of how she must have looked in the 17th century, then you would see that was sort of the image you have, but she's not in that form now. But that's who she was when she was a human. So you'd see that aspect. So it's not stuck anywhere. It is a rebirth. And as to whether they really is your mother and is your father or is Mozart, that's another discussion. It can easily be spirits being very powerful and very manipulative. Now there's the God realm, the devas, they are like, sometimes can be like guardian angels. They're helpful. They're good. They can be like, they're kind of devas in the God realm. They could be useful. People have that type of experience. And we'd see them in a certain form, of course. That's just the vision we have of them, you know, because that's the one we knew. So that's the best I can say, Maria. I don't know. Jenny has a question.
Yes. I'm sorry, there's a few other questions there as well.
Go on.
So to follow on from the being reborn in other realms, Susanna was asking, in this realm, the human realm, beings are born through a mother. Is that the same in all other realms as well, like hell realms or God realms?
Sometimes, no, many can be spontaneous. Even some creatures, some little animals, some little bugs can be spontaneous birth. You know, like sometimes you see creatures and there's and suddenly beings appear. There don't seem to be mummies and daddies there. There can be spontaneous birth. Hell beings, I think, and spirits are spontaneous birth. They don't need wombs and things. But some even little bugs just have, I think they're called spontaneous rebirth. Yeah.
A question from Lakshmi. She's asking, I've heard that many streams of consciousness can be gathering around at the moment of conception.
That's right.
Yeah. So what are the causes and conditions for this stream accessing the fetus as opposed
Yeah, right.
to
Exactly. There's this book I remember reading that Wisdom published 30, 40 years ago called The Art of Tibetan Parenting. And these American mothers, a couple of them decided to interview Tibetan mummies about how they prepare for rebirth. Or even, it's very fascinating because, I mean, because they know that the consciousness is coming from another place, they prepare to have sex in a very nice, they do lots of practice because they know that's when the consciousness comes. So they want to attract a really good quality consciousness. So they would not, for example, have greedy sex or drunk sex. This is a very interesting point, by the way. You know, they'd be very conscious. So they prepare themselves, they do their practice first, and then they'd have sex and have fun, but it wouldn't be greedy and grasping or drunk or arrogant or aggressive, because that can attract a very unhappy consciousness. And I think, look at our world when we just, I mean, anybody has sex with anybody now, and it's gross. Not being fundamentalist, it's just really animal-like. So what do you think we're doing? Attracting really unhappy human beings to come to our womb. We're dragging down the human race. It makes sense. That's one point. Now, the other one was fascinating. In this book, also, she quoted a Lama. This is hilarious. I love this. One Lama saying that at the time of a male and female human being having sex, billions of consciousnesses that have recently passed away are all hovering around trying to get in. I think that's mind-boggling, but we got in. The causes and karma of that is like a miracle of non-killing karma, having been practiced in the context of living in vows of non-killing. That's the cause of a decent human life. So it's like a miracle getting a human body, but it's not a miracle. It's not potluck. It's the result of a lot of hard work, in particular non-killing. And for us to have a life in which we also want to practice a spiritual path, we must have practiced that non-killing in the context of living in vows of not killing. So we got the human body. It's extraordinary. When we understand that, that's very powerful. Billions of consciousnesses are all hovering around trying to get in. You know, that's incredible. Driven by attachment. This is the samsara we live in. It's not such a fun place. What else?
Jenny has said, she says, "Dear Venerable Robina, many thanks to you for wonderful teaching. Is it true that we shouldn't touch our loved ones at the moment of their death once they lose their last breath for as long as possible, or for
That's right.
8 hours?
Exactly. As long as you can, 3 days even. Best. That's the point. Because you see, that's the point. So, of course, with Lama Yeshe, they moved his body, they drove him, and he was okay because he's a holy being. But even that, you know, my friend Paul, they moved him into the ambulance, they moved him onto the gurney, they drove him into this, they pushed him there. It can still be possible you can do it very gently, not to disturb the body. Because if you push the body in certain places, that could encourage the consciousness to quickly come from there. So, for example, when you die and the type of rebirth you're going to have is indicated by where your consciousness leaves. So if you're going to get a human body, the consciousness leaves through the eyes. If you're going to have a spirit rebirth, which is a really suffering rebirth, it will leave through the mouth. So there you are kissing your beloved husband once he's dead. That can encourage his consciousness to rush out of his mouth and he'll go straight to the spirit realm. So it's for their sake because it can affect the mind. So as much as you can, that's as much as you can not to disturb the body. But on the other hand, as Lama Zopa said, even cutting out the organs, the mind still might be there. It all depends on the situation. You just got to be conscious of it. That's and aware you don't want to disturb their mind. That's the point. That's the point, because it might cause them to get an unhappy rebirth. If you're going to be born in the animal realm, your mind will leave through the sex organ. And if you're going to be born in the hell realms, it'll leave through the anus, I think, or something like that. Go on. What else?
That's all in the chat at the moment.
Okay, good. Any more questions? All right. So, okay. So just summarize. The mind goes continuing from life to life to life. the karma, the karmics, everything we think and do and say sow seeds in our mind, and one of those seeds will be triggered at the time of death that will determine our next life. It's triggered about before you stop breathing. So that is the time when you want to be quiet, peaceful, the perfect environment, hearing the right things, so that, you know, let's say you're a Buddhist with your friends saying your prayers, so that they help you navigate that, so you're not freaked out, so you're peaceful and you're hearing the sound of your Lama's name, you're hearing the practices, and that's the best condition. Or if it's your Catholic grandma, you know, about the looking forward. I said before, the looking forward thing is very interesting. Lama Zopa says that's attachment, but you can use it. So that's why for a Buddhist, don't be fearful, but to look forward to a human birth. That's using attachment, of course it is, but it's skillful means. Look forward to a human birth, then you won't be afraid of letting go of this one. If you're a Catholic or a Christian and you look forward to going to heaven, and some Christians just can't wait to get to heaven, they're going to have a happy death because they're not afraid to let go of this one. So it's skillful means to look forward to something good. Of course, if you're a materialist, you can't do that. But it's skillful means. Rinpoche said it's skillfully using attachment. That's a very powerful point. So you can talk to your grandma, talk about how heaven is lovely, how God loves you. He's waiting for you there. That'll make her so happy. She's got somewhere to think about. It's very skillful. Think about a pure land. Think about Amitabha Buddha. Think about your guru. Think about a new perfect human rebirth. It calms your mind down. So it allows you to let go of this one and you can look forward to the next one. It's skillful means. It's very interesting. But the conducive place, the right environment, the right practices, get to know the person's mind. Everything has to be to help them to be peaceful and virtuous. That's the point, you know, the animal as well. Then you can do the best you can to ensure that with that good condition, a virtuous karmic seed will be triggered, which will determine their decent next life. Then the next stage is that as much time as you can to leave the body undisturbed. Of course, if the mind leaves immediately, like a friend of mine had this really awful car accident in California, I wasn't there, but I was on texting a friend there, and the parents gave the permission to pull the plug on her. You know, and then before the Geshe, our Geshe Dagpa arrived at the hospital to do the prayers, her lungs exploded. So her mind left immediately. Her mind left very quickly. So her mind had already gone, you know. So you don't need to leave the body for 3 days then. That's silly. It's only if the mind is still there, because you can help the mind. And then of course, and we'll discuss all this tomorrow, all the different things you can do once the person's mind leaves the body. There's still plenty you can do to help this person. And we'll discuss all that tomorrow.
Venerable Robina, we just had a quick question come through from Dave, if that's okay.
Good, yeah.
Hi, Robina.
Yes.
Just wondering, if you are, say, in a situation where you know you're going to die very rapidly, like you're going to have a head-on car crash, that last split second, you can see the truck coming into your car. If you train yourself to, say, Vajrasattva's shorts, would that be a benefit? Or if you're actually having to know you're dying, that the last thought was Vajrasattva practice, would that be a benefit?
No question. I think that's just like my friend on death row. He was ready. That's why we don't have to wait to think we're going to be given death row, or wait for the car accident to come, or like the other point, don't wait for the fear to arise. Prepare our minds. This is the entire point, Dave. And if you're really trained, it will come automatically, and that moment will feel very long, and you'll be ready, baby, and then you'll go whizzing off to a pure land. No, there's no doubt about it. I remember I know this is a strange experience of time. I know I had this car accident in India. I was in the back seat, and the driver was behind the driver, and he went head on. He hit head on into a truck, and it really did feel like slow motion. I had plenty of time to think, you know. Was very curious. So, and your mind can be very quiet. I remember reading about one woman, a mother. She didn't die in the end, but in a car accident, she had her daughter next to her. All she was thinking about was compassion for her daughter. So imagine, so I think it's possible, but you've got to train like anything. How can you do your driving test if you haven't trained to drive on the roads every day? But if you train your mind, I think we underestimate our ability of habit. If you've trained your mind, it'll go straight to your mind when you see that truck. No doubt about it. Really, Dave.
No, That's what I'm working on now.
Well done.
I have Vajrasattva rattling around in my head,
That's
almost like an ice cream cartoon. You know what I mean?
Well done. It's the way to go, Dave. It really is. You're programming your mind. You're habituating. That's what practice is, Dave. And it works. You know, we know it works. Well done. But may you have a peaceful, joyful death.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
That reminds me, actually, this is the Lama Zopa's point. If you're not prepared and you are freaking out and you've never thought about it, of course, it will be very fearful. So then when the time comes when you stop breathing and the karmic seed will be a negative one, and that is triggered, then the experience, Rinpoche says there are many things, and people observe this. I mean, people I've talked to, I'll tell you one experience of a friend of mine in Cairns, you know, who sits with the dying, a Sakya nun. But this, what can happen, you can shit yourself, you can be screaming, you're living in agony, your eyes are wide, you know, you're having a complete panic attack because your mind's getting more subtle and you're literally seeing your lower realm rebirth coming, you know. So this friend of mine, this nun in Cairns, she said that she sits with the dying, and this amazing experience, maybe Jay has got some experiences like this as well, I don't know, of this fellow suddenly becoming like a demon. His eyes turned red, they went up into his head. He was screaming in such agony, like he was seeing the worst experiences of like a total nightmare. She'd never seen anything like it. And then he calmed down and then he died peacefully. And she said one of her lamas told her that probably he had like an experience of a hell realm and then it finished and then he died peacefully and got a decent rebirth. And Lama Zopa, I told him, and he said, yes, he knew another example like that. So even then it's possible things can still change. But if you die with a virtuous state of mind, that literally Lama Zopa says it's like going towards the light, because you're seeing you're seeing a happy rebirth. The mind is blissful. Death really is a blissful experience. So I remember a friend of mine, an Australian bloke, who fell off the roof. He was working at Vajrapani Institute. He was married to an American woman there, and they were working at Vajrapani in California. And he fell off the roof, and he's dying in her arms. And she said he was radiant, which means virtuous karma was triggered. As he is dying, he's seeing his future life. He's blissful. Could even have been a Pure Land. But also the wonderful story about Steve Jobs. I love this story. He knew he was dying for several years. He had this cancer. And then I heard that he was a Buddhist, but I've read his biography. There's no mention of it. But what I did find interesting, his daughter from a previous marriage, I read her memoir. And on one of the days before he was dying, she talked about how this Brazilian Lama, and he's a friend of mine, I can't think of his name, Segyu Rinpoche or something. He's been recognized by Lati Rinpoche as a reincarnated Lama. He's Rinpoche, and he's a healer. He's a wonderful man. He lives in San Francisco, got a center there. He was there with Steve. That made me very happy, you know, that Steve was connected with the Dharma in that way, whatever. But anyway, the point is, he was very ready for death. You could see it by the way he talked. And this wonderful story his sister told. They'd been given away at birth, so they met later, and she's a writer. So it's basically the story's like this. You know, I'm the sister, let's say, and just in front of me is Steve, and I can see his face. But his two daughters are facing Steve, so I can see the backs of their head, but I can see Steve's face, and I'm the daughter. I'm the sister, and I'm watching. She reports this, and she said Steve was sitting up, looking into the eyes of his daughters with unbelievable love, begging them to forgive him for leaving them. He wasn't freaking out, in other words. He wasn't all grasping and frantic. He was radiant. And then she said he looked over their shoulder into the distance and he went, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. And then he died right there, like that. Well, my feeling is he saw the Pure Lands and he went, quickly died like that. That's amazing. I love that story. That's the way to die. Because if virtue is triggered, then the mind is joyful, is blissful. This is what they say in the teachings. It's a very interesting point, you know. So yes, Dave, do your mantras, baby, and you'll die blissfully. And there's a beautiful, in this chapter I'm going to now tell you about Amitabha's Pure Land. I love this chapter in this book. Like I said before, I was so cynical about all the Pure Lands. It's like an alternative to heaven. I didn't want that. But then I read this commentary that Lama Zopa gave when he gave the empowerment in San Jose, and Holly sent me this rough transcript. So that was the missing chapter for the book, and it's quite short. But basically Lama Zopa says in there that, you know, we should pray, aspire, want to go to be born of Pure Land. Of course, though, based on bodhicitta. Why? Like I said before, because it speeds up the process. You can get enlightened really quickly, and then you can come back as a human and do what you like and help people. It just seems sensible, you know. So anyway, what he said in the book was, he said different things. He said, this is the only Pure Land that is available to ordinary people who don't have high realizations. So the cause to go there is to want to go there, to think about the marvelous benefits, to practice virtue, of course, to have, and bodhicitta. These are the causes, you know. You don't just leave it up to random. This is what I said before. You've got to choose what you want and you create the causes. Be very precise. This is very surprising to us. So anyway, the other thing he said, there was a beautiful chapter in there about Milarepa's disciple. I can't think of his name. Something like about doing powa, one of the practices that's commonly done. Rinpoche talks about it many times. It can be done at different times. It's called transference of consciousness. And so either a person can train in this themselves, and it's related to the practice of Amitabha. And so you can do the practice yourself, which seems to me you've got to be quite advanced to enable your own consciousness to leave through the crown chakra to go to Amitabha's Pure Land, or a Lama can do it for you, or people can do it for you. It's all described in the book. But this beautiful sweet thing where he says this student, I can't think of his name, a famous Milarepa disciple. When you do this practice, he says, you know, you will fly like when you leave the body, you will fly like an eagle straight to Amitabha's Pure Land. So anyway, I like that story. So I'm thinking, that's what I said. I'm deciding to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. So the other thing to talk about is this business of, I think I'll read this chapter to you. It's very beneficial for anybody who's thinking about taking a highest yoga tantra initiation or has received a highest yoga tantra initiation. This is extremely important information. So let me get my iPad and I'll read. No, I've got the book on my computer. I'll read it to you as long as my voice doesn't run out. This is from the book, the Death Book. Okay, so I'll just read it to you, okay? It's very inspiring. And if you haven't received empowerments yet, it might inspire you to want to receive, and it mightn't make much sense, but those who have empowerments, it's really important to take this seriously. Okay. So generally, it's not permitted to openly give details of the methods that the great yogis use. However, I feel it would be useful to talk about them here. Death is the moment they've been waiting for. At the point in the death process, when all the grosser consciousnesses have ceased and only the extremely subtle consciousness, which is the clear light consciousness, remember, is left, as discussed, you know, the yogis, those who have observed karma well, kept their precepts purely, spent their lives training their minds in the clear light meditation, and have been able to recognize the base time clear light, the imagined visualized one, are now able to recognize the clear light of death. In other words, they're able to stay conscious at the ever more subtle levels, and that can only happen if you've practiced, you know. They can remain in meditation in the clear light conjoined with emptiness, meaning their clear light mind meditating oneness on the emptiness of inherent existence, for as long as they wish. 1 hour, 3 days, many months. Some meditators stay in the clear light meditation in their hermitages for years. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's root guru, Ling Rinpoche, for example, stayed in meditation for 13 days. Lama Yeshe too remained in meditation after passing away, and we talk about that in another chapter. There are many examples like this. Apparently, one of the previous Ganden throne holders, these are the people who are the heads of the Gelug tradition. People often think it's the Dalai Lama. It's not. There's a person always appointed. Now, like since the first one was Tsongkhapa, and now it's like the 98th or the 99th Ganden throne holder. Spent some 21 days in meditation. And I remember at Buxa, when we escaped from Tibet, in India, that was a place where they all stayed. There was a Sera monastery monk in the same house that I lived in, a very simple monk who spent many days in meditation after passing away. It seems that the great 8th century Bodhisattva Shantideva spent something like 30 years in meditation after he passed away. They're not just blissing out, they're working. They're doing work. They're removing the obstacles from the mind. They're becoming enlightened. It's not just having a hippy-trippy time. At Kopan Monastery, I found among Lama's things a note that referred to a text in which this is written. I don't remember the details now. By concentrating in this subtlest state without distraction, some practitioners achieve enlightenment at this time. They actually realize the 3 bodies or kayas of a Buddha. They transform ordinary death into the wisdom body. That's the Dharmakaya. Remember I said the actual name of actual enlightened mind that pervades the universe, no physical body, pure wisdom, compassion, infinite or blah, blah. That's the actual Buddha. And in Sanskrit term, the Dharmakaya, they call it, the wisdom body. So the person who is able to actually go through the death process in the meditation throughout all their lives, then when they get to the clear light at the time of death, they're completely trained for it, and they can actually transform that clear light mind and actually become the Dharmakaya at that point. But not only that, they can also transform. Then the next one is they can transform ordinary intermediate state into the enjoyment body, the Sambhogakaya, which is this subtle body the Buddha manifests in for the greatest meditators and yogis to see. That's all the deities we see, all these pictures of the statues and all the hundreds and thousands of Buddhas. They're all the enjoyment body that the Arya Bodhisattvas can see in their meditation. So they're able to transform the intermediate state into that experience. And then they're able to transform ordinary rebirth into the emanation body, the Nirmanakaya. This is the actual body that is the one that we can see. Some practitioners, like Lama Tsongkhapa, achieve enlightenment in the intermediate state. Many Tibetan lamas have passed away in meditation since Tibetans first came to India as exiles in 1959. For those whose lives ended in Indian hospitals, it was difficult to receive permission to leave the body alone for a while. Ordinary Indians never believed that such a thing as meditating while passing away was possible because they had never seen it happen. Their usual concept was that the moment a person died, the body should be taken out and burned before it began to smell. Thinking that a person was dead as soon as the breath stops, the doctors were amazed that these lamas could stay in meditation for long, long periods without the body decaying. Far from there being a bad smell, the room had a fantastic sweet smell due to the power of their realizations. So Lama Yeshe, when he passed away in America, I was in London working for Wisdom Publications, was 1984, March. About this time, Losar, New Year, Tibetan New Year. So 3 or 4 of us flew then. We found it was a Saturday. Of course, those old-fashioned days, you had to find a travel agent who was open, who bought you a ticket. So we all went to the funeral. It was a very moving experience. So I remember that, we had practices for like 4 or 5 days, and Lama's body had been taken from the hospital in Los Angeles, driven up north about 12, 15 hours, really slowly in a ute, and then left in the room next to the gompa. That was when I lived there, that was my bedroom. But I remember at the time, it was Lama's body was open in the coffin for 5 days. And it smelt sweet. It was still flexible because his mind was still there meditating. It had a sweet smell. It was very interesting. It wasn't rotting at all, So you too can transform death, intermediate state, and rebirth. The practices these yogis do are available to those who have taken a highest Tantra initiation. They are the quickest methods for achieving enlightenment in one brief lifetime of this degenerate time. By doing these practices, you can collect in just a few years the merit that would otherwise take you 3 countless great eons to collect on the Mahayana perfection vehicle path. These practices have a very special arrangement, and doing the sadhana every day, the complete sadhana, not just simply generating yourself as the deity and reciting the mantra without the mandala, not like that, is a very important preparation for death. You will understand this when you have received the commentaries on the generation stage and the completion stage practices. Whether you do the long version of the sadhana on the day of the deity you are committed to do, or the middle length version, they both contain the essence of the generation stage practice, transforming the three experiences of death, intermediate state, and rebirth into the three bodies. Even the short Yamantaka sadhana, for example, has these three important points. By meditating in this way, you prepare your mental continuum by purifying ordinary death, ordinary intermediate state, and ordinary rebirth, enabling you to actualize the path, time, Dharmakaya, the path, time, Sambhogakaya, and the path, time, Nimanakaya, thus planting the seeds to achieve the result time, three bodies. When you just recite the words, there is, of course, a positive imprint left on your mind, but you are not strongly preparing your mind as you would if you were to actually meditate. Senchab Rinpoche used to emphasize very much that if you are busy and can't do much meditation in the deity sadhanas, when it comes to your daily commitments, you should do more elaborate meditations for your main deity. You can do your other sadhanas quickly. However, in all your sadhanas, you must do the three kayas meditation, even if it's not elaborate, even if you don't follow the extensive procedures. You should at least meditate on the last point, the four qualities of the foundation, having the divine pride, thinking, this is the result time Dharmakaya, this is me, and so on. And then on the day you die, because you have trained your mind by doing your sadhanas every day, you are able to recognize what's happening, the 25 stages of dissolution, without missing any. Just as I described all those 8 stages, there are 25 things that occur. Just as you had meditated, because your mind is well trained, you are able to recognize the clear light. And during the intermediate state and at the time of birth as well, you will be able to meditate on, to visualize the deity. Practicing the highest Tantra path like this, using death as a quick path to enlightenment, is incredible. It is the quickest way to purify the defilements, the dualistic view. In other words, having prepared during the generation stage, on the basis of that realization, you then actualize the path, time, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nimanakaya on the completion stage, actually ceasing the intellectually acquired defilements and the simultaneously born defilements. Eventually, you cut even the subtle defilements, the dualistic view, and in that moment, achieve the result time 3 bodies, enlightenment. This is how you can enjoy death, by using the tantric path, the quickest way to achieve enlightenment. All right. So it's all very kind of technical. It's kind of very delicious and technical, you know. As Lama Yeshe says, Tantra is very technical. And this death process is related to the Vajrayana. And there's some wonderful books published by it. This book of Lama Zopa's, there's a wonderful book of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a commentary on one of the Panchen Lama texts. It's called The Mind of Clear Light. And it's about this process. It's a very wonderful book. And there's another book by Lati Rinpoche. You should put this in the notes for people, Amy. They're both really, one book by Lati Rinpoche called Death, Intermediate State and Rebirth. This was published like 40 years ago. But it's very detailed about the death process, very detailed, it's very interesting. And the other one is called The Mind of Clear Light by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, translated by Jeffrey Hopkins. Okay, both fascinating. Okay, what else, people? Questions now? Any questions about what I've just read? What about the book? Maria asking what? What about and what?
Living and dying.
That's, I don't know. I haven't read the book. It's by Serkan Rinpoche, by Sogyal Rinpoche. And I don't know if it goes into the death process much, but I think it's more like a general Dharma book, but talking about how it's necessary to live in impermanence, which is what we've been talking about. I don't know how much detail it goes into. I'm not familiar with the book, I'm afraid. What else?
There's no other questions in the chat at the moment. So if
All
anyone
right.
has a question,
Okay. That's enough, I think.
thank you,
Maybe.
Venerable Robina. Thank you so much. We'd just like to quickly show you.
What?
Take that one.
We just had some special offerings for you today. I don't know if you can see these, but we thought you might.
Oh, look. Le pack butter. I love it. What's the other one?
This
What's
is beautiful
cheese.
cheddar cheese.
Cheddar cheese. My favorite. Thank you, darling. I love it. Thank you so much. How delicious. I will imagine enjoying it. Okay, you people. So we can finish now with just a little motivator. Just think 2 minutes. Just think. Okay, like a meditation. Here we've been. This 4 hours, whatever it is. These different things. Learning to take some of this as tools to help us develop live our own lives. So we live a life of ethics. So we're ready for death. So life will be more joyful. That's the point. That will be the direct consequence of becoming familiar with death. It doesn't increase fear. It lessens fear because you enjoy life more. You appreciate it more. Then you're ready for death, just like Dave was saying. You program your mind. And of course, if you've taken highest yoga tantra or you aspire to, this is the most precious practice. That chapter is so moving, you know. This is really a brilliant technical way to die really well, to be in charge of the process, you know. So maybe all that, so we can then help others, all the dogs, all the ants, all the people like Jay, serving people in death. It's the most precious gift we can give, you know. And I think even if you're sweeping the floors in the old people's home, you can be such a precious help to the dying people, to love them, to give them love and kindness and sweetness. That's the most precious gift you can give to somebody. Jang Chob, Sem Chog Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Gu Chig, Ke Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang, Gong Ne Gong Du Pa Ba Shog, Ge Wa Di, Nyu Du Dag Lama Sangye Drub Gyo Ne, Drawa Ki Chig Kyang Maru Pa, De Sala, Thank you, sweethearts. Goodbye. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Venerable
All
Robina.
being well. So
Yeah.
homework. When you hit the pillow tonight, make the aspiration that when you wake up in the morning, if you wake up in the morning, don't laugh. If you wake up in the morning, as soon as you come back to consciousness, you bliss out. Don't just go, oh God, it's morning again. Go, oh my God, I cannot believe my petrol tanker morality hasn't run out yet. And rejoice and leap out of bed and think, I'm going to use this 24 hours as well as possible. That's the way to think about impermanence. You bring it to the front of your mind and then you appreciate what you have. And if you look over to your husband and he's still alive, then that's a bonus as well. Okay. Thank you, darling. See you later. Bye.
Thank